We've all had those moments when life feels picture perfect, when everything clicks into place, and you tell yourself you finally made it. That was my life. I had a beautiful wife, Lisa, smart, funny, and stunning in that effortlessly graceful way. We'd built 15 years of memories together, had 2 amazing kids, and lived in a home that felt warm and full of love. I thought we were untouchable. Our youngest son, Ethan, was turning 6, and we wanted to make it special. Lisa always threw incredible parties, the kind where friends stayed late, laughing in the backyard long after the cake was gone. This one was no different. She went all out with decorations, music, and enough food to feed an army. We even had relatives fly in from out of state. Among them was my brother, Jason. When he walked through the door with his signature easy grin, it felt like a scene from an old movie. Jason was that kind of guy, charming, magnetic. People gravitated toward him. "Look who finally decided to show up," I said, pulling him into a hug. Jason laughed. "It's been too long, man. I had to be here for my nephew's big day." Lisa appeared, holding a tray of cupcakes. Her face lit up when she saw him. "Jason," she beamed, wrapping her arms around him. "It's so good to see you again." They hadn't seen each other in years, but their ease with each other was immediate. I didn't think much of it. Why would I? Jason was family, and Lisa had always gotten along with him. Back when we first started dating, Jason and Lisa would joke around constantly. Sometimes I'd joke that I had to fight Jason off when we went on dates. It was harmless fun, or at least that's what I thought. The party was everything we'd hoped for. Kids running around, adults catching up over drinks, the whole backyard buzzing with life. At one point, I glanced over and saw Lisa and Jason talking by the grill. She was laughing at something he'd said, tossing her head back the way she did when she was genuinely amused. I felt a small twinge of something I couldn't quite name. Not jealousy exactly, but something. I shook it off. It was Jason, my brother. I trusted him with my life. And Lisa? She was the mother of my children, my partner in everything. The night stretched on, and when the last of the guests left, Jason asked if he could stay for a few extra days. "I've got some things to take care of here in the city," he said. "Plus, it'd be nice to hang out like old times." Lisa chimed in enthusiastically. "Of course, stay as long as you want." And why not? I was buried in work with a big project coming up, so I figured having Jason around would keep things lively while I was at the office. It felt good to have family close. But over the next few days, something shifted. Jason and Lisa seemed to be spending a lot of time together, going out during the day while I was stuck in meetings and conference calls. When I got home one night, Ethan ran up to me and hugged me tight. "Dad, can you play with me? Mom's been out a lot." I ruffled his hair and asked, "Where's your mom?" He shrugged. "Out with Uncle Jason again." Again. That word echoed in my head. I tried to push the thought away. I told myself it was just how Jason was. He loved exploring new places, and Lisa had always been eager to show people around. Maybe they were just catching up on lost time. But late that night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling while Lisa scrolled through her phone, something gnawed at me. She seemed distant, lost in her own world. I turned to her. "How was your day?" I asked, trying to sound casual. She smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Good. We went to that new art exhibit downtown. Jason loved it." I forced a smile. "That's great." But it wasn't great. A flicker of doubt took root in my mind, small but persistent. At that moment, I told myself I was being paranoid, that everything was fine. After all, what could possibly go wrong between a man and a woman who had promised to be together forever? If only I'd known how blind I really was. A week passed, and life went on as usual. Or at least that's what I tried to tell myself. Work was relentless, with back-to-back meetings and site visits, leaving me drained by the end of each day. But no matter how tired I was, every time I walked through the front door, I felt the absence of something. Or maybe someone. Lisa had always been home by the time I returned, usually with dinner ready, her hair pulled back, and that familiar soft smile on her face. But lately, the house felt quieter. Some nights, Lisa and Jason wouldn't even be there when I got home. It wasn't just 1 or 2 days. It was becoming a pattern. One evening, I finally asked outright as she set her bag down by the door. "Where have you been?" I tried to sound curious, not accusing. Lisa gave me an easy smile. "Oh, Jason wanted to check out that old bookstore downtown. You know how he is. He's been on this kick about rare books." I nodded slowly, forcing myself to appear unfazed. "Seems like you two have been spending a lot of time together." She laughed and gave me a light kiss on the cheek. "He's your brother, remember? I'm just being a good host." I wanted to believe her. God, I wanted to believe her. I told myself that everything she said made sense. Jason didn't know anyone else in town. He was staying with us, so of course she was trying to keep him entertained. But beneath her calm demeanor there was a slight defensiveness, like she already knew what I was implying. That night at dinner, Ethan spoke up again with the brutal honesty that only kids have. "Mom's never here for bedtime anymore," he pouted, poking at his mashed potatoes. Lisa looked caught off guard, her fork pausing mid-air. "Sweetheart, that's not true. I've just been busy." "But you're always with Uncle Jason," Ethan muttered. His words hung in the air like smoke. I cleared my throat, trying to shift the conversation. "Well, I'm here for bedtime tonight, buddy. What book are we reading?" But inside, something twisted. I hated that Ethan noticed her absence. I hated even more that he wasn't wrong. The next day, during my lunch break, I called Lisa just to hear her voice and ground myself. She picked up on the second ring. "Hey, babe," she answered, sounding slightly breathless. "Hey, everything okay?" "Yeah, just running errands with Jason. What's up?" I hesitated. I didn't even know why I'd called. To check in? To reassure myself that things were normal? Instead, all I managed was, "Just wanted to see how your day's going." There was a brief pause. Then she chuckled. "You're sweet, but don't worry. I'll be home in time to make dinner." I hung up feeling worse than before. Later that week, I bumped into Sarah, one of Lisa's close friends, at the grocery store. We exchanged small talk as we walked down the aisles, but then she brought up something that stopped me cold. "So, you and Lisa must be thrilled to have Jason around again," Sarah said, grabbing a box of cereal. I nodded. "Yeah, it's been nice." Sarah smiled wistfully. "They were always so close, weren't they? Back in the day, you could have sworn they were inseparable." My hand froze over the cart handle. "Back in the day?" I repeated. She blinked, as if realizing she'd said too much. "Oh, before you and Lisa got together, it's nothing, just old memories." I forced a tight smile. "Yeah, old memories," but the words clung to me like a bad dream. Inseparable. I couldn't shake it. That night when I got home, I sat in the driveway for a long time before going inside. My thoughts kept circling back to what Sarah had said and to everything I'd been trying to ignore. The way Lisa's face lit up around Jason. The fact that she never seemed to be home anymore. Lisa was in the living room when I walked in, curled up on the couch with a glass of wine. She looked up and smiled. "Hey, you're home early." I sat, down next to her, trying to keep my voice steady. "I ran into Sarah today." Lisa's expression flickered. Just for a second, but I saw it. "Oh? Yeah. She mentioned something interesting. Said you and Jason were inseparable back in the day." Lisa laughed, but it sounded forced. "Oh, that? We were just friends, you know that. Sarah's always exaggerating." "Is she?" I asked, holding her gaze. Her smile faltered. "What are you getting at?" I hesitated. I didn't want to accuse her without proof. I didn't want to become that paranoid husband who reads too much into things, but I couldn't deny the growing knot in my gut. "Nothing," I finally said, standing up. "I'm just tired." As I headed upstairs, I could feel her eyes on me, filled with something I couldn't quite read. Guilt? Worry? Or something else entirely? When I reached the bedroom, I shut the door behind me and leaned against it, trying to slow my racing thoughts. I wanted to believe her. I really did. But I wasn't sure I could anymore. The following days passed in a strange blur. I buried myself in work, trying to convince myself that everything was fine, that Lisa's behavior was innocent, that Sarah's comments were meaningless. But no matter how hard I tried, the doubt clung to me like a shadow. I felt like a man, standing at the edge of a cliff, staring into an abyss, knowing that once I fell, there'd be no coming back. That Friday, I had a site visit on the outskirts of the city. It was a long, exhausting morning, and by noon I was starving. I remembered a small cafe nearby that made great sandwiches, so I decided to stop there for lunch. The place was quiet, filled with the soft hum of conversations and the hiss of the espresso machine. I ordered a coffee and a turkey sandwich and took a seat by the window. The sunlight streamed in, warm and comforting. For the first time in days, I felt like I could breathe again, and then I saw them. The door chimed as two people walked in, laughing. A wave of discomfort churned within me. It was Lisa and Jason. At first, I thought my mind was playing tricks on me. But no, it was them, clear as day. Lisa was holding Jason's arm, her head tilted toward him as she laughed at something he said. They looked intimate, familiar in a way that made my blood turn to ice. Then Jason leaned down and kissed her. It wasn't a friendly peck on the cheek. It was a kiss full on the lips. She didn't pull away. In fact, she smiled and kissed him back. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. My breath caught in my throat, and for a second, I thought I might actually be sick. The cafe around me blurred, the hum of voices fading, into a dull roar. I forced myself to stay calm. No sudden moves, no scene. Don't fall apart here. I grabbed my coffee cup, walked toward the door, and slipped out without them noticing. Once I was outside, the cold air hit me like a slap. I leaned against the wall, my heart hammering so loudly I could barely hear myself think. This isn't happening. This can't be happening. But it was. I drove home in a daze, barely remembering how I made it back without crashing the car. My mind replayed the scene over and over again like a broken record. Lisa, Jason, together, in public. By the time I pulled into the driveway, I was shaking. I sat there for a long time, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. When I finally walked inside, the house was eerily quiet. Ethan was at school, and Lisa wasn't home yet. I went straight to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and stared at the fridge, where a photo of our family was pinned with a magnet. We looked so happy in that photo. Me, Lisa, the kids, Jason standing beside us at some family barbecue from years ago. I felt like I was looking at strangers. Lisa came home an hour later carrying a shopping bag and humming under her breath. When she saw me sitting at the kitchen table, she paused. "Hey," she said, her smile faltering. "You're home early." I didn't answer right away. I just watched her, my heart pounding in my chest. "How was your day?" I asked, my voice steady, despite the storm inside me. She hesitated just for a second before answering. "It was fine. Ran some errands, grabbed a coffee." "Alone?" I asked, tilting my head slightly. Her eyes flicked toward me, wary now. "No, Jason came with me. He wanted to check out that new place downtown." "Ah," I said, leaning back in my chair. "The cafe?" She froze. It was subtle, but I saw it, the way her shoulders tensed, the way her breath caught for just a second. "You saw us," she whispered. I nodded slowly. "Yeah, I saw you." Lisa's face crumbled. She sat down across from me, her hands trembling. "It's not what you think." I laughed bitterly. "It's not what I think? Really? Because from where I was sitting, it looked like you were kissing my brother in the middle of a cafe." Tears welled up in her eyes. "It just happened, okay? I didn't mean for any of this to happen." I slammed my hand on the table, making her jump. "How long, Lisa? How long has this been going on?" She looked away, ashamed. "Since he got here." Her words hit me like a freight train. I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. "And before that? Was there ever anything between you two before we got married?" Lisa hesitated. Too long. I felt a knot tighten inside me as the truth began to surface. She nodded. We had a thing back in college, before you and I got serious, but I thought it was over. I thought I'd moved on. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The past I thought I'd known was suddenly rewritten. Jason wasn't just some charming brother-in-law. He was the man Lisa had loved before me, maybe even more than me. I stood up, my hands clenching into fists. You lied to me. Our whole marriage, you lied. Lisa reached for me, tears streaming down her face. Please, let me explain. But I stepped back out of her reach. I trusted you. I trusted him. You've both destroyed everything. She sobbed, but I didn't care. I couldn't care. Not after this. Get out, I whispered. I can't look at you right now. Please, I said get out. Lisa grabbed her bag and left, slamming the door behind her. The house felt too quiet without her, but I welcomed the silence. I sat back down at the kitchen table and stared at nothing, trying to make sense of what had just happened. But there was no sense to it. There was only betrayal. The house felt hollow after Lisa left, like the life had been sucked out of it. I sat at the kitchen table for what felt like hours, staring at the same spot, replaying every moment of the past few weeks. Every laugh they shared, every time she came home late, every excuse she made, it all came together in a sickening puzzle. I'd been too blind to see. Eventually, I pulled out my phone and stared at Jason's number. My thumb hovered over the screen. I wanted to call him, to scream at him, to demand answers, but I knew that if I heard his voice, I might lose what little control I had left. Instead, I texted him. We need to talk. Now. Seconds later, the 3 little dots appeared. Then, his reply came through. Jason, okay. Where? Me. My place. Now. I didn't care what he was doing. I didn't care if he had excuses lined up. I wanted the truth, the raw, ugly truth. And I wanted it face to face. It didn't take long. 20 minutes later, I heard his car pull up outside. I stood by the window watching as he got out, his hands shoved into his jacket pockets. He looked casual, like this wasn't the meeting that was about to tear everything apart. When he stepped inside, I stayed rooted in place, arms crossed, fury simmering beneath my skin. Jason closed the door behind him and gave me that same damn grin he always had, the one that had charmed everyone, even me. Hey, man, he said like this was a normal day. My fists clenched at my sides. Cut the act. Jason's smile faltered. What's going on? I took a step forward, my eyes locked on his. You know exactly what's going on. He froze, his face tightening as the realization hit him. Look. No, I cut him off. You don't get to look me in the eyes and talk your way out of this. I pointed toward the kitchen. Sit down. Jason hesitated, then slowly walked over to the kitchen table and sat, rubbing his hands together nervously. I stayed standing, looming over him. How long? I demanded, my voice low but shaking with rage. Jason looked up at me, guilt written all over his face. Evan, how long? I slammed my hand on the table, making the whole thing rattle. He flinched, but he didn't look away. Since I got here, I laughed bitterly, the sound foreign even to me. Of course, and before that? Was it really over back in college? Or was I just the idiot who swooped in while you were on pause? Jason's face went pale. He opened his mouth, closed it, then opened it again. I never meant for this to happen. That's bullshit. And you know it. I leaned in close. You came here for it, didn't you? Not for some work thing, not for family, for her. Jason's silence was all the confirmation I needed. You son of a bitch. My voice cracked, but I didn't care. You've always been the golden boy, haven't you? Everyone loved you. And now you couldn't stand that I had something you wanted. So you took it. Jason shook his head desperately. No, it wasn't like that. Then what was it, Jason? I roared, my vision blurring with rage. Was it some unfinished fantasy? Some stupid, what-could-have-been story you had to live out? He buried his face in his hands. I don't know. When I saw her again, it all came back. I thought it was just old feelings, but then It was like no time had passed. He looked up at me, his eyes glistening. I swear I didn't come here to hurt you. I took a step back, disgusted. But you did. You did, Jason. You both did. I exhaled sharply, trying to hold it together. You were my brother. I trusted you. I loved you like no one else. And you threw that away? For what? Jason swallowed hard, his voice barely above a whisper. I don't know. I wasn't thinking straight. You were thinking plenty straight when you kissed her in that cafe, I spat. Jason's head dropped again, shame finally overwhelming him. I messed up, I know that, but I still love you, man. You're my brother. I stared at him, incredulous. Your brother? That's what you're going with? You can't betray someone like that and still call them family? Jason wiped his face with both hands, visibly breaking down. What do you want me to do? I'll do anything to make this right. I leaned forward, my voice icy. You can't make this right. You made your choice the second you touched her. Jason opened his mouth again, but I held up a hand to silence him. I don't want your excuses. I don't want your apologies. I want you out of my house and out of my life. His face twisted in pain, but he nodded. If that's what you want, it's what I need. Jason stood up slowly, like a man condemned. He hesitated at the door, as if he was going to say something else, but I gave him a cold, hard stare. Without another word, he stepped outside and closed the door behind him. The silence in the house was deafening. I sank into a chair, my head in my hands, feeling the weight of what had just happened. In a single afternoon, I'd lost my wife and my brother, two people I thought I'd never lose. I reached for my phone and stared at Lisa's contact picture. Her smile wide and carefree, taken years ago on a family trip. I knew I had one more confrontation left. She had to face me too. But this time, it wasn't just about betrayal. It was about the truth I'd been denied for years. I pressed the call button and waited as it rang. When she answered, her voice was shaky. Hello? I took a deep breath, steadying myself. Come home. We're not done yet. There was a long silence. Then she whispered, Okay. I hung up and stared at the front door, knowing that whatever came next would change everything. Lisa walked through the door about 20 minutes later, her face pale and her eyes swollen from crying. She stepped inside cautiously, as if the floor beneath her feet might collapse at any second. I didn't say anything right away. I just watched her close the door behind her and set her purse down on the counter, like it was any other day. But this wasn't any other day. This was the day everything broke. She looked at me with a weak, pleading expression. Evan, sit down, I said, my voice flat, emotionless. She hesitated, but eventually she pulled out a chair at the kitchen table, the same chair where Jason had sat less than an hour ago. The sight of her there, in that spot, sent another surge of rage through me, but I forced myself to stay calm. I sat across from her, folding my hands in front of me like I was preparing for some kind of grim negotiation. I talked to Jason, I began. Her face crumpled. I know. He texted me. I scoffed. Of course he did. Gotta keep the story straight, right? She shook her head quickly. No, it's not like that. Then what is it like, Lisa? I snapped, leaning forward. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you and my brother have been making a fool out of me. And not just now, this has been brewing for years, hasn't it? Lisa's lip trembled. I didn't plan any of this, Evan. You have to believe me. I laughed bitterly. Believe you? After everything you've done? I stared at her, unblinking. Tell me the truth, Lisa. When did it really start? Not just now. I mean back then, before we got married. She dropped her gaze to the table, tears falling onto her hands. It wasn't supposed to happen. Back in college, Jason and we were together, but it didn't last. He left town, and I thought it was over. I clenched my jaw. You thought it was over? You married me, Lisa. You had my children. You built a life with me. My voice cracked. And the whole time, there was still a part of you that belonged to him. She reached out toward me, but I pulled away like her touch burned. No, Evan. I chose you. I loved you. I still do. Don't. I shook my head, feeling sick. Don't sit there and say you love me when you've been sneaking around with my brother behind my back. You don't do that to someone you love. Lisa wiped her face with the sleeve of her sweater, struggling to keep herself composed. I thought I could bury it. I thought it was just old feelings, something that didn't matter anymore. But when Jason came back, she broke off, her voice cracking. It all came back too. The silence that followed felt suffocating. I felt like I was being crushed under the weight of every word she said. So you're telling me, I said slowly, that all this time he was your what if, and I was just the safe choice. Lisa's head snapped up. No, that's not true. Isn't it? I whispered. You stayed. You smiled. You pretended everything was fine, and the second he came back you couldn't resist, could you? She sobbed into her hands, and for a moment I just stared at her, feeling nothing but emptiness. I thought we were happy, Lisa. I thought we had everything. We did, she cried. We do. Please, Evan, this doesn't have to end like this. I stood up, pacing the length of the kitchen. End like what, Lisa? What do you think happens now? You think we can just go back to normal? Pretend you didn't destroy everything? She stood too, desperate. We can fix this. I'll cut him out of my life, I swear. I'll do anything. I laughed, a harsh, hollow sound. Cut him out of your life? He's my brother, Lisa. Our kid's uncle. How do you think that's going to work? She froze, realizing the impossibility of it all. I turned to face her, the anger finally boiling over. You didn't just betray me, you betrayed us, you betrayed this family, you betrayed our kids. My voice cracked again, and I hated the weakness in it. Lisa staggered back as if the words themselves had hit her. I never wanted to hurt you, she whispered. But you did. I exhaled slowly, running a hand through my hair. I don't even know who you are anymore. Lisa took a shaky step toward me, her hands outstretched. Please. I can't lose you, Evan. You already did, I said quietly. The second you kissed him, you lost me. She broke down completely, sobbing into her hands, her whole body shaking. I watched her cry, and for the first time in 15 years, I didn't feel the urge to comfort her. All I felt was done. I walked toward the door and opened it. The cold breeze rushed in, but it felt like the only thing keeping me steady. Lisa looked up at me, her tear-streaked face full of panic. Where are you going? I'm not going anywhere, I said, nodding toward the open door. You are. She froze, stunned. Go, I said, my voice soft but firm. Go think about what you've done. Go think about what you've destroyed. But you can't stay here tonight. She hesitated, and for a second, I thought she might refuse. But then she grabbed her purse and walked toward the door. As she passed me, I heard her whisper, I'm sorry. I didn't respond. I closed the door behind her and locked it, pressing, my forehead against the wood, my whole body trembling. The silence of the house surrounded me again, but this time, it wasn't peaceful. It was suffocating. I sat down on the couch and stared at nothing, my mind filled with fragments of memories, laughter, and promises that no longer meant anything. Lisa was gone. Jason was gone. And I was alone. The next morning, the house was eerily still. The silence wasn't the comforting kind. It was heavy, pressing down on me like a weight I couldn't shake off. I woke up on the couch, my neck sore and my mind replaying every awful detail of the day before. Lisa's tear-streaked face, Jason's hollow apologies, the words I'd said that couldn't be taken back. I sat up, rubbing my face with my hands, trying to pull myself together. But the truth was, there was no pulling out of this. My marriage, the life I'd built, was in ruins. The kids were still asleep upstairs. I knew I had to hold it together for them, at least for a while. But the second I thought of Ethan asking where Lisa was, a heavy feeling settled in my chest. How was I supposed to explain this to him? To either of them? Mom's not home because she was kissing Uncle Jason in a cafe. No. I couldn't tell. Them? Not yet. The first thing I did was call in sick to work. There was no way I could walk into meetings pretending I cared about budgets and timelines. After that, I picked up my phone and stared at Lisa's contact photo. My thumb hovered over the call button. I should have wanted to talk to her. But I didn't. Instead, I called the only person I could trust right now, my best friend, Mark. Mark showed up at the house an hour later, his expression grim the second he saw me. "Jesus, Evan, you look like hell." I gave him a weak shrug. "Feel like it too." He stepped inside and closed the door behind him. "What happened?" We sat down in the living room and I told him everything, every last horrible detail. Mark listened, without interrupting, his face growing darker with each word. When I finally finished, he sat back, shaking his head. "Man, I don't even know what to say." "Yeah." I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees. "Join the club." Mark rubbed, the back of his neck looking like he wanted to punch something. "Your own brother," he muttered. "What the hell is wrong with him?" I laughed bitterly. "Take a number." "What are you going to do?" Mark asked. "I don't know." I exhaled slowly. "But I'm not letting this slide. I can't." Mark nodded. "Good. You shouldn't. And if you need someone to back you up when you file for divorce, I'm there, whatever you need." The word divorce felt like a punch to the gut, even though I'd already been thinking it. Hearing it out loud made it real. Mark's voice softened. "You deserve better than this, man. Don't let her guilt you into thinking otherwise." I didn't answer. I wasn't sure what I deserved anymore. That afternoon, I met with a lawyer. I wasn't ready to make any final decisions yet, but I needed to know my options. The lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Carol, laid it all out for me. "Do you want to keep the house?" she asked, adjusting her glasses. I nodded. "Yeah, the kids need stability." Carol gave me a firm nod. "Good. We'll make that a priority." She went on to explain how the assets would be divided, what I could do to protect my finances, and how custody would likely be handled. I listened, numb to most of it. The only thing that mattered was keeping my kids safe from the fallout. When the meeting was over, I walked out of her office feeling like a part of me had been stripped away. But at the same time, there was a strange sense of clarity. I wasn't helpless, I wasn't powerless, I was angry. And anger, I realized, could be a powerful motivator. The next few days passed in a haze. Lisa stayed at her sister's house, which was probably for the best. We exchanged a few texts, short, business-like conversations about the kids and schedules. Nothing personal, nothing emotional. Then, on Friday afternoon, I got a message from Jason. "Jason, can we talk? Please, face to face." I stared at the screen for a long time. Every instinct in my body told me to ignore him, to block his number and never hear his voice again. But something made me say yes. Maybe it was closure. Maybe it was the desire to look him in the eyes one last time and say everything I hadn't said before. We agreed to meet at a bar downtown, neutral territory. When I walked in, Jason was already there, nursing a beer. He looked awful. His usually confident posture was slumped, and his eyes were bloodshot. Good. He looked up when I approached, guilt plastered all over his face. "Evan," I didn't. Let him finish. I sat down across from him, folded my arms, and said, "You've got 5 minutes. Use them wisely." Jason swallowed hard and nodded. "I'm sorry," he began, his voice low. "For everything. I was selfish, and I ruined everything. I wish I could take it back." I stared at him, unimpressed. "That's not good enough." He winced, like my words physically hurt. "I know it's not, but I don't know what else to say. I never meant for this to happen." "You keep saying that," I said, my voice ice cold. "But you kissed her, Jason. You made a choice, over and over again." Jason's face twisted with regret. "I lost control." "You lost control?" I laughed, shaking my head. "That's your excuse?" He looked down at his hands. "I loved her, Evan. I always have. But I never wanted to hurt you." I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. "You loved her," I repeated, the words tasting like poison. "You loved her so much you destroyed my life for it." Jason's eyes welled up with tears. "I'm so sorry." For a moment, I just sat there, staring at him. Part of me wanted to reach across the table and hit him, but another part of me pitied him. He wasn't the golden boy I grew up admiring anymore. He was broken, and he had done it to himself. I stood up. "We're done." Jason looked up at me, his face crumbling. "Evan," I shook my head. "You're not my brother anymore." His shoulders sagged, and I turned away, walking out of the bar, and into the cold night air. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the chill. It was over. I had lost them both. But somehow, for the first time all week, I felt free. The house was quiet when I got home that night. Too quiet. The kids were spending the weekend with Lisa at her sister's place, which gave me time to process everything without worrying about putting on a brave face for them. I closed the door behind me, leaned back against it, and let out a long, slow breath. It was over. Jason was out of my life. Lisa was out of the house. The past few days had felt like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from, but somehow, here I was, still standing. I walked into the kitchen and opened the fridge. The leftovers from earlier that week stared back at me, untouched. I grabbed a beer instead and sat at the dining table staring at the emptiness around me. For years, this house had been full of life. The sounds of the kids laughing, the smell of Lisa cooking dinner, the quiet nights we'd spent on the couch binge-watching shows and talking about the future. And now it was just me. But the strangest thing was, I didn't feel broken anymore. Not in the same way. There was still a dull ache in my chest, but it wasn't sharp anymore. It wasn't tearing me apart. It was just there. I grabbed my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found Lisa's name. I hesitated for a long moment before pressing the call button. She answered after a few rings, her voice soft and cautious. "Evan?" "Yeah," I said. "I wanted to talk." There was a pause. "Okay." I took a deep breath. "I met with Jason tonight." Her breath hitched. "Oh, it doesn't change anything," I said quickly. "But I thought you should know. I told him it's over. Whatever we had as brothers, it's done." Another long silence. Then she whispered, "I'm so sorry, Evan." "You've said that already," I replied, my voice calm but firm. "I know." Her voice broke a little. "But I need you to know I mean it." "I do," I said. "But knowing that doesn't fix anything." She sniffled on the other end of the line. "What happens now?" I stared at the floor, already knowing my answer. "We file the paperwork. We figure out a way to co-parent without making this harder for the kids. And then we move on." Her sob was barely audible, but I heard it. "Is there any way we can—" "No," I said gently but firmly. "There's not." There was another long silence before she finally whispered, "Okay." We hung up, and I sat there for a while, staring at the phone. I wasn't angry anymore, not the way I had been. But there was no coming back from what she'd done. Trust doesn't grow back once it's burned to the ground. The next morning, I woke up early and took the kids to the park. I hadn't told them anything yet, just that Mom was staying at Aunt Claire's for a while and that things would be different for a bit. They didn't ask too many questions, thankfully. Ethan was just excited to feed the ducks. Watching them run around, giggling and carefree, something clicked inside me. I might have lost Lisa, but I hadn't lost them. They were still my world, and I could still give them a good life, even if it didn't look the way I'd imagined. A few months later, the divorce was finalized. It wasn't a bitter process, surprisingly. Lisa didn't fight me for the house, and we agreed on shared custody of the kids. Maybe it was guilt on her part, or maybe she just wanted to avoid dragging things out, but it didn't really matter. The papers were signed, and that chapter of my life officially came to a close. I started making changes, little by little. I redecorated the house, rearranged the furniture, and painted over the wall where Lisa had insisted on hanging her favorite artwork. It was a fresh start, and as strange as it felt, it was liberating. About 6 months after everything went down, I ran into Lisa at a school event for Ethan. We hadn't seen each other much outside of custody exchanges, and I wasn't sure how it would feel to be in the same room with her again. But when I saw her, something strange happened. She smiled, a small, tentative smile, and I smiled back. It wasn't a smile of reconciliation or lingering feelings. It was the smile of two people who had been through hell and come out the other. Sighed, scarred but alive. "Hey," she said softly. "Hey." We stood there for a few seconds, watching Ethan run across the gym with his classmates. "He's happy," Lisa said. "Yeah," I nodded. "He is." She glanced at me, and for the first time there wasn't any sadness in her eyes, just something like acceptance. "I hope you're happy too." I looked at her, really looked at her, and realized I didn't feel anger anymore. I didn't feel much of anything, really, and maybe that was the biggest sign that I'd finally let go. "I'm getting there," I said. She nodded, and that was it. No dramatics, no awkward goodbye. Just two people watching their kid grow up. Months turned into a year. I started a new business, threw myself into work and parenting, and even went out on a few dates. Nothing serious, but it felt good to remember that there was life after Lisa. One night, as I tucked Ethan into bed, he looked up at me with his sleepy, innocent eyes. "Dad? Yeah, buddy? Are you happy?" The question caught me off guard, but I didn't hesitate when I answered. "Yeah, I am." He smiled, satisfied, and snuggled into his pillow. As I turned off the light and closed the door behind me, I realized something. I wasn't just telling him what he wanted to hear. I was telling the truth. Lisa's betrayal had shattered me. Jason's actions had destroyed my trust, but they hadn't destroyed me. I survived, and I was finally free to live the life I deserved.